As you likely know, I spent some time in Japan recently. It was my fourth time in Japan, partly because my brother lives in Japan, so I've been there a few times to visit he and his family. Now, when I arrived in Japan, and even before I arrived in Japan, I was very confident because I've been to Japan before. I, I have an understanding of the train system, so I thought to myself, this is going to be easy. But it was actually harder than when I anticipated. Partly because I was really tired when I arrived, but 8 different people roughly had to help me to arrive at my destination. I realized I wasn't so keen or wasn't so smart when it came to the train system in Japan. And yet, when I look back on this situation, I could clearly say to myself that Christ acted through these people. Now, likely not all 8 of these people were Christian, and yet from my perspective, I could clearly see that Christ acted through them to guide me to my destination. And that's really what we have to do as Christian people, is we have to see Christ in all people. It doesn't matter what culture the people come from, doesn't matter what language people speak, doesn't matter, what religion people are drawn to, or maybe they have no religion. We have to see all people through the lens of Christ, and we have to diligently search for this at times, and a lot of times we can't tell this by looking at a video or watching the news. We actually have to come in contact with a person, and we're all a mix of light and darkness. We're all a mix of God's goodness and sinfulness. And yet we can't just identify ourselves as sinners, because we are so much more than that. And really the gifts revealed to us that Jesus, the Christ, receives, the little baby really didn't need these, but they identify who Jesus is. We have the goal. We are connected to the King of the universe. We always have full access to the King of the universe that is everywhere. And this King of the universe isn't a king that's going to power over us or control us, but give us the respect of free will so that we can freely love God. In return, we can freely, care for others. It's the choices that we have to make. And then, the frankincense, what we are in constant connection with God. We are sharing in the divinity. What a gift it is. And it's wow. And so that adds so much to our dignity as being a human being. But also, myrrh, points to death. Now, of course, the thing is we have to learn to continuously die to self. And what's the one thing we ought to die to the most is self-righteousness. I know what's best for you. I know how you ought to live your life. I know what's best for me, and you're not measuring up and this and that. Well, that is not good. This will actually block, like nothing else, the light of Christ acting in us and through us. And so we have to constantly surrender this. We have to constantly die to this as we search and we work diligently to resurrect other people to new life. Now, in the first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah, these people are in a tough situation. They are returning home, and their homeland is destroyed. It's in ruins. They have been in exile and they're returning home. And yet the prophet encourages them that God is going to help them to rebuild their homeland, going to help them to rebuild their lives, restore them, and they will be an example for other nations. But it will be an example of how God is obviously helping these people. And, the people are not to draw ultimately attention to themselves, but to God. Even as Christian people, we're not supposed to draw attention to ourselves, but lead others to God. And everything that we say and we do, hopefully, is done in the name of Christ, and that ought to be our morning prayer. Now, in the second reading, Jews and Gentiles were at odds with each other during the time that this letter is written. And even in the life of Jesus, there's tension. And the Jewish people really despise Gentiles. And yet our gospel reading in this reading is really pointing out that Jew and Gentile are on equal territory to receive the graces that God wants to give. God is so generous in dispensing graces and blessings. We have to be open to receiving what God wants to give us. And ultimately, we are channels, we are instruments of God's grace towards others. And, as these magi, these Gentiles go to the Christ child, I mean, they have to come from a long way away. And the other thing is they are in tune with God. And this comes right at the end of the text, is that through the dream, they go home a different way. Obviously they're in tune with God. They're being nudged by God as well. And so let us not underestimate how God is at work in our hearts and in our world. And so as we gather around the table, Lord, maybe we're lost in life. Maybe we're a little confused, but yet we come to know that we are truly blessed. We share in the King of the universe, the great high priest, and the one who died to reveal the depths of God's love for us, so that we can fully embrace this, receive this, and be a channel of God's peace, love, and goodness for others.